Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you with the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. Coming up, the Teaching Kitchen is a new program coming to the St. Barnabas Hospital Health and Wellness Center to promote healthy and affordable eating. The director of St. Barnabas Hospital Health System Center for Culinary Medicine and Teaching Kitchen joins me to discuss the program. How will the program improve health outcomes for residents of the Bronx? Then the Open Restaurants programs are here to stay. Outdoor dining was a lifesaver for many New York City restaurants. Executive Director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance joins me to discuss the permanent additions to the New York City restaurant industry. What are the key principles or guidelines of the permanent program? After that, as Election Day begins, organizations are encouraging New Yorkers to go out and vote. Assistant Executive Director for Public Affairs at the New York City Campaign Finance Board joins me for a discussion on the importance of voting in local elections. What are some challenges Bronxites face when voting? And finally, chemotherapy can save the lives of millions of cancer patients. However, treatment is known to cause alopecia. Combating this result, researchers at the Montefiore Einstein Cancer Center are testing a specialized hair technique known as scalp cooling. A doctor at Montefiore Einstein Cancer Center joined me to discuss the study. How will this procedure help women battling chemotherapy-induced alopecia? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. The St. Barnabas Hospital Health and Wellness Center launches a new program called the Teaching Kitchen. Serving residents of the Bronx, the program offers cooking classes that provide access to quality local foods while highlighting how to cook traditional meals in healthier ways. The director of St. Barnabas Hospital Health System Center for Culinary Medicine and Teaching Kitchen, Abbie Gellman, joins me to discuss the program. Abbie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, can you talk a little bit about the SBH Teaching Kitchen?
Sure. So we are a whole kitchen right in the Wellness Center on 3rd Avenue across from the main hospital. So it is a gigantic, beautiful kitchen space where we have a whole host of, it's essentially a professional kitchen, but used for teaching purposes. So we have community classes, we have classes for the residents and the physicians. We have programs and series for different patients and community members. It's kind of a wonderful place to be.
Now, when I heard Teaching Kitchen, of course, I just figured it would be like normal classes that we normally take. But I think it's really, really cool that there's actually, an actual kitchen designated and designed to help people. Can you talk a little bit about, the importance of making it a very hands-on experience?
Sure. So with cooking, you have to actually do it, right? So you practice makes improvement. Nobody's perfect. But when you do teach, when you do go to our teaching kitchen, you can actually cook, right? So it's a little bit more of a learning situation. You cook together, you learn from myself. I'm a registered dietitian and a chef, and I have 2 wonderful culinary educators and instructors who work with me. And you get to work with your friends, your family, other people from the neighborhood, and just really getting your hands dirty and getting to cook and then eat what you cook is so much better than kind of just watching it on TV, right?
Now, what was the inspiration behind actually creating this program?
The program? Well, the Teaching Kitchen opened a couple of years ago, right before COVID, and the whole purpose was to serve the community. So we know that food and nutrition are a huge part of health and wellness. And if you cook, generally speaking, it's healthier than a restaurant or maybe a packaged processed food. So we're trying to kind of get back to basics here and really help empower people and motivate them to take their own health and wellness into their own hands, essentially.
Now, I know that here on this show and just in general, a lot of conversations about food, we're always talking about access to healthy foods. But, I think that understanding nutrition can be just as important and knowing what to actually do with the food. So, can you further explain the benefits of understanding how to cook nutritious meals?
Sure. So our bodies are like cars, right? So we need to fuel them properly, just like you want to put the right fuel in your car. So if for someone like me, I want to have fruits and vegetables, lean protein, whole grains, and that I guess it's not just for me, it's kind of for all of us, right? We want to make sure that we hit all of our macronutrients every day. So that's protein, carbohydrates, and fat. So we want to really make sure that we're using all the food groups and nourishing our bodies properly.
Now, the Bronx is filled with many cultures known for rich cuisine, which I think is really, really exciting. But this is also something that scares a lot of people when they kind of switch to eating healthier. They're afraid that they have to lose some of that culture. Will the classes take that into account when thinking about new recipes?
Sure. So every cuisine is healthy, right? It could be Caribbean, it could be Dominican, it could be North African, it could be Israeli, it could be Italian. All of us in wherever we're from, wherever our people are from, there are healthy foods, right? We're not all only eating deep fried, white processed things. So we do focus on the community, which is 75% Hispanic. We have a Caribbean cuisine class. We have a soul food cooking class. Everything that we have in our recipes is a reflection of who is attending our classes and who are our patients at the hospital. So, for example, sancocho is a traditional soup, and we took out a lot of the meat and we replaced it with more plants like mushrooms and a bunch of kind of bulked it up with other things, but all of the same spices and seasonings and a lot of the same ingredients are still there. We just kind of pulled back on a little bit of one thing and bulked it up with a little bit of another thing.
I think that's really cool. And I think it gives people some hope because I know that a lot of people are afraid to even make that step because they feel like it's just not accessible to them. Can you just explain, with the dish that you just mentioned, what was the response like from the community when they realized that this is something that they can actually do?
Oh, people love it. And we have certain people who come to every community class, and then we can't add new ones fast enough. They just want to keep coming. And then we've had other private events and events with, residents and people at the hospital, and we always do that too. And whether they've had it before or not, everyone loves it, and it's gone, and people start doing that recipe at home, and we get a lot of great feedback about that one specifically.
Now, oftentimes when people try to lead healthier lifestyles, it can be temporary. Do these type of classes offer something that could help make this change a little bit more longer lasting?
Absolutely. So cooking is a skill. So once you have that skill, nobody can take it away from you. So it doesn't matter if you had never cooked before or you have cooked a little bit, you're going to learn the basics. You're going to learn how to make new dishes, how to make veggies taste good, how to roast a chicken, how to make fish, how to add more plants in a way that you like. So you can take those skills and use them for the rest of your life and just build and build on them. Whereas we're not changing your diet. We're not telling you you're not allowed to eat something anymore. We're focusing more on the positive of how to add more fruits and vegetables, how to add more whole grains and beans and legumes in a way that you enjoy and that is easy for you to do at home.
How can a well prepared, healthy meal enhance the quality of life?
Oh, that's a big question. So, kind of back to where we're a car, right? So, um, our brain works on fuel, our body works on fuel, and the fuel is food. So, if you're eating a well rounded plate that has fruit and vegetables and grains and nuts and beans and all of these wonderful things, then you will feel better. and your body will respond well, and you'll be able to work better, to move better, to think better, all of the things. You'll feel better. Whereas if you're eating a lot of, let's say, processed foods or deep fried foods or things that don't offer any nourishment, your body will kind of rebel against that a little bit, and you might feel sluggish or tired or gain weight and all of those things.
Now, why is this kitchen so important for a borough like the Bronx?
Well, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of reasons. There's limited access to food. There are food deserts in the Bronx, and that is a challenge, right? And we also have a lot of low income families who are on SNAP and WIC and all of those types of things. So if we can offer them a place to come that they can learn how to use the foods they have access to, and actually learn about how to cook properly, or use, for example, the foods they get from WIC or things that they can purchase on SNAP, how to use those and make themselves and their families nourished in an easy, approachable way. I think it helps everybody.
Now, who is eligible to join this class, and what can participants expect when they go to the teaching kitchen?
So anyone can come, even if you don't live in the Bronx. Everyone is welcome. It's $5 for a community class, and that $5 gets you about an hour and a half of cooking, and you'll get about a week's worth of food. So you'll cook with other people, and then everyone has different recipes. So at the end of that hour and a half, there could be, 12 different recipes that have been made, and you all get to enjoy that meal together and take the leftovers with you. So you might be at a station doing some sort of brown rice and peas, or that sancocho, for example, and a couple people at the station next to you might be doing something completely different. So you'll get to look and see and try different things and work together with people in the community.
Now, I quickly just want to add that, we're approaching the holiday season where, everyone, we love to eat all of these amazing foods. Why is it important to kind of get into the habit now before we get to, Thanksgiving and Christmas?
So, I will give a little plug. We're doing some holiday classes. So we're doing a Thanksgiving dinner class, and the next day we're doing a leftover class. So kind of what to do with your Thanksgiving leftovers. We're also doing a healthy side and dessert class. So it's more about, when we come into something like the holidays, it's more about strategy and thinking through. So if you know you're going to a party, for example, or you're going to a big dinner, you don't have to eat everything at once, right? It's great to try everything and have some of everything, but there will be leftovers you can eat tomorrow. Or maybe you can, you don't need to eat two pieces of pie. You can eat one piece of pie. It's all about moderation and kind of going into it knowing that this isn't the last time you're going to see the food. You'll have other opportunities, right? And take it in stride and kind of listen to your body.
Now, can you just let everybody know how they can learn more about the Teaching Kitchen?
Sure. If you go to sbhteachingkitchen.org, and there you can find our monthly schedule of classes, and you can also register for classes online.
All right, Abbie, thank you so much for joining me.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. Of course, it's awkward to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping. Hey, bestie, how's sketches? Ready? It's hard to get their attention. Ready? Go. Yes, look at that. You even turn yours over. So if you want to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping, you have to get it trending. Right, Backpack Kid?
Let's do it.
First, invite your kid to do the vape talk. Let's try this. All right.
Why is he here?
Yeah, I gotta get it trending, honey.
Come on.
To the left. To the right. Let's go.
Oh, honey, can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
I see a lot of your friends vaping.
Visit talkaboutVaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
Welcome back. The Open Restaurants program is set to become a permanent part of New York City's restaurant industry. What started out as an emergency relief plan for New York City restaurants struggling with the realities of a pandemic has become a new way to enjoy the best New York City restaurants have to offer. Joining me to discuss the permanent addition to New York City is Executive Director for the New York City Hospitality Alliance, Andrew Rigie. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, to refresh our memory, because we did talk about this some time back, can you just explain what the Open Restaurants program is and how it actually began?
Great. Well, Open Restaurants, the program started back in June of 2020 as a direct response to the pandemic. As you recall, indoor dining was shut down. We had no idea when it was going to reopen. And we did know once we started to reopen, we were going to have limited and reduced indoor occupancy. So if we were going to serve customers and serve them safely, we could do so outside. But until that time, we only had about 1,200 licensed sidewalk cafes throughout the 5 boroughs. The Open Restaurants program was an emergency order that allowed restaurants throughout the city to expand both on the sidewalk and the roadway area, subject to certain limitations like a bus stop or a fire hydrant or other types of obstructions, to set up and serve folks outside. So we went from about 1,200 licensed sidewalk cafes to more than 12,000 restaurants participating in the Open Restaurants program, which was the emergency program to help save restaurants and jobs during the pandemic and allow people to dine outdoors safely. And it did all of that, brought vibrancy back to the streets, allowed people to get out of their homes and their apartments after months of lockdown, saved thousands and thousands of restaurants from shuttering, and is credited with saving about 100,000 jobs.
Now, were you surprised at all to see the success of Open Restaurants?
Well, we knew it was going to be successful because it was essential for restaurants to survive. We knew people wanted to come together to eat and drink and socialize because they had been stuck in lockdown. But, you know, we didn't know the sheer success that it was going to be. I mean, I hear from restaurateurs all the time that said, if it wasn't for outdoor dining, my restaurant would not be here today. And the same goes with jobs. And, you know, I mean, we saw in the middle of the pandemic, in the freezing cold, it could be snowing out. And guess what? New Yorkers were dining outdoors. So I think there was like a civic duty among so many folks to say, you know what? We need to be together. We need to support our local businesses and the people working at these restaurants. And they did it.
Now, after the success of Open Restaurants, why did it take maybe a year or so to become a permanent part of New York City's restaurant industry?
Well, you know, there is a whole process. So I think our elected leaders in the city saw the success of outdoor dining restaurants, the people they employ. They saw the success and how it helped save their restaurants and how customers want to dine outdoors. You know, pandemic, no pandemic. They enjoy dining al fresco. So I think those leaders saw the interest of it, the success of the program, and they voted to make it permanent. However, now the hard work has really started because the city is still going through the program. Just because we're going to have permanent outdoor dining in the city of New York doesn't mean that we are making permanent the current open restaurants temporary emergency program. There's a whole legislative and policy making process going on right now to help standardize this program, to help make it more sustainable. There's a lot of beautiful outdoor dining setups. There's others that have been torn down or should be torn down or need to be upgraded. I think the program really showed the resilience and the ingenuity of these local small business owners to do what they needed to survive. But no one knew, almost 3 years later that we'd be in the situation we were and how long the pandemic was going to go on. So a lot of the materials that were used weren't weatherized. They weren't, used when restaurants had all these resources to properly invest. So there's a process going on right now to really upgrade the system to make sure that it will work well for many years to come.
Now, what are some of the key principles or guidelines of the permanent program?
Well, we want to make sure that restaurants have access to both sidewalk space and roadway space, but you also want to make sure that they comply with all the clearance, the Americans with Disability Act requirements. We want to make sure that any materials that are being used are weatherized, that they can hold up to the different elements of a winter, of a summer, and everything in between. We want to make sure that they're, attractive looking, but they're unique. We don't want everything to look so standardized, in our opinion. We really want restaurants to be able to give it their own flavor, their own flair, their own style that matches the culture of that restaurant. So it doesn't just look like a bunch of generic outdoor dining setups. I think what we're going to see is, if people remember sidewalk cafes before the pandemic, they'll look very similar on the sidewalk to what we had before the pandemic. But on the backside of that, we want a lot of the red tape, the bureaucracy, the expenses removed for small business owners. Because previously, like so many things for small businesses in the city, there was so much bureaucracy, so much red tape to get a sidewalk cafe. And for a lot of smaller restaurants, it was just cost prohibitive. So we want to get rid of that. The roadway seating is a novel. It's a new program. So, we want to make sure that there's different design options that work for the different communities that they serve.
How will this permanent addition to the restaurant industry benefit New York City economically?
Well, I think that's going to be huge. As I said before, bringing back about 100,000 jobs. Restaurants, if they get more seats, they can employ more people. They can serve more customers. So more jobs results in more payroll taxes, more people employed, spending money in New York. If more people are dining out and dining outdoors, they could be generating more tax revenue, which helps fund our city's essential services. I just think you're buying more from the upstate farmer in New York. You're buying more from this purveyor, that supplier. So it's creating more economic activity. I also think that we've seen when you have outdoor dining and when you have open streets, which is another program, and it's combined with outdoor dining, it actually creates even more economic activity. So I think when there's excitement, when there's a vibrancy on the city streets, it can bring more people out to spend money, creating more jobs, and just creating a more vibrant streetscape that belongs to the people instead of just belonging to cars.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about smaller restaurants. You briefly mentioned them. What impact did the Open Restaurants program have for those restaurants or for restaurants in lower income areas like the Bronx?
Yeah, well, there were very few outdoor dining sidewalk cafes in the Bronx pre-pandemic. That number increased, by the hundreds because of outdoor dining. So many of these restaurants either they were restricted from having them, there was too much bureaucracy, too much red tape, and the cost was prohibitive. So we went from, I forget the exact number, but not that many sidewalk cafes to, hundreds of restaurants in the Bronx doing outdoor dining. And I think under a permanent program, once, folks know, here's the requirements, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, here's how to do it. And if the city gets it right, It'll be really, really successful. Councilmember Marjorie Velasquez from the Bronx is the prime sponsor of the legislation. So I know she's taken it really to heart and really wants to make sure that the program is accessible for restaurants in the Bronx to participate in, because everyone should have that benefit if they want to dine outdoors or they want to have a restaurant to be able to have outdoor dining. You know, it shouldn't be reserved for the lucky, few or the lucky group primarily that was located south of 96th Street in Manhattan. I mean, they should have them too, but it should be an inclusive 5-borough-wide program that restaurants can participate in and people that live and work in those boroughs can enjoy as well.
I like that you brought that up, because I do think, I mean, if you go through Manhattan, you can see a difference of the outdoor structures. And I know recently you talked about abandoned structures. I saw a few of those in the Bronx. So I was worried if, this would be something a lot of lower income area restaurants could maintain. Could you talk a little bit about that? Is this something that they can do long term?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the goal is, and what we're advocating for is to make sure that there's not a lot of that red tape and bureaucracy, and it's not cost prohibitive for smaller restaurants in all types of neighborhoods to be able to participate. That's an essential part of the program for us. I think the sidewalk will probably be more accessible. It's easier. Tables, chairs, maybe some umbrellas. You can bring them in at night or you lock them up. That's much easier. The roadway is a little bit more complicated because it's costly. There's different uses of the street. So there's all these different considerations that need to be decided whether or not to have it. But I do think restaurants in the Bronx, in all different neighborhoods, will be able to have it should they choose. That's the real goal that we want. And I think the Open Restaurants Emergency Program showed that when you make it easy enough for businesses to apply, you don't burden them with all these costs, they will participate. So we have seen that it works if the city does it right. So now we need to make sure that as they transition from the temporary emergency program to new guidelines under a permanent program, they get it right again. So it's inclusive, it's an equitable program that businesses throughout the Bronx and throughout the other 4 boroughs can all participate in.
So we have about a minute left. Can you quickly talk about, just the application process, if there is one, and how people can learn more about that?
Well, so that whole process still has to be developed. Currently, the city council is deliberating the legislation that will set some guidelines and structures for the program. It'll then have to be signed into law by the mayor. We're hoping that'll happen this year or very early in 2023. Then it'll go through rulemaking process where there's another public hearing, and they'll define some more of the specifics about the application process. But we're getting some things removed. You won't need a certified architect to certify your drawings, which took time, which took money. We want to make sure that the process is a little bit quicker and the costs are down. So we hope it'll be a much more streamlined and faster and less expensive process than people had to go through if they wanted a sidewalk cafe before the pandemic.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
To the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. Today is Election Day and New Yorkers are heading to the polls to vote. This voting season, New Yorkers will vote for U.S. Senate, governor, and so much more. Joining me to discuss voter turnout in the Bronx and how to get young voters involved is Eric Friedman, Assistant Executive Director for Public Affairs at the New York City Campaign Finance Board. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
Now, Eric, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and your effort to get more people voting?
For sure. So I'm with the New York City Campaign Finance Board, and we do a few things. In addition to administering the city's public matching funds program for city elections, it's a great city initiative that helps more people run for city office without having to rely on raising private funds from big money and wealthy developers and rich lobbyists and all those special interests. It allows people to run for office by relying on the support of their friends and neighbors. And that's a really great thing that we provide, that the city offers for folks running for city office. We also, through our initiative, the NYC Votes, provide voter outreach, voter engagement for every election, local, state, and federal, with a specific focus on communities that are underrepresented among those who go out and vote. And so we've got a particular focus on making sure that folks who might not have adequate representation or who lack power in the local process, providing them the information they need to go out and vote with confidence so their communities can be represented in government decision making.
Now, you talked about it a little bit, but whenever someone thinks about voting, they usually just think about voting for the president. But there's just so much more to that. Can you talk about, the importance of this election and the importance of local elections?
Oh, of course. And I think you made a great observation there. Turnout in those national elections when we elect the president is always kind of relatively high. In New York City, it runs usually above 60%. But people don't necessarily come out and vote in the same numbers in those local and state elections. And that's a real shame, right? Because it's local and state government that has, in a lot of ways, a much more direct impact on our day-to-day lives. Right, it's local government, it's state government that controls, that can help keep our streets safe. Helps ensure that our schools are educating our kids, right? To provide us with clean open spaces, ensure that the traffic moves smoothly, that we can move around the city, and get the places we need. Those responsibilities all fall to local and state government. And so, it's really important, and that's why we, through our NYC Votes work, really focus on helping people understand what's at stake in these local elections. Help people understand how their vote can make an impact on their everyday life. And we do that through the voter guide that we publish and we send to every household with a registered voter. We do that through the resources we provide online. That voter guide is available online at nycvotes.org. We do a lot of work on social media and all the platforms there where you go for information. At NYC Votes, we'll provide a lot of information about kind of what's at stake in these local and state elections.
I want to quickly talk about, because you're talking about the elections, can you just let everybody know what will be on the ballot and what they can expect to see when they go into that booth?
Oh, for sure. So again, it's a really big, important election year. We're electing our representatives to Congress and the United States Senate. We're electing the governor of the state, the head of state government. So we'll be voting on who our next governor will be. We'll serve a 4-year term as leader of New York State government. We are voting for our state representatives to the state legislature. So for Assembly and State Senate. So the people who pass laws at the state level will be voting for them this fall. We're going to be voting for judges, folks who at the state and county level, who make those decisions in the judicial system. We'll have an opportunity to elect judges. And we'll be voting on 4 important ballot questions coming up that are on the ballot. One that is focused on providing money for environmental initiatives across the state. State government is requesting permission from the voters to spend $4.2 billion on projects that would counter the impacts of climate change. That's a question that goes before the voters, and they have the ability to help make that decision and really shape the future of state government. Now, there are 3 questions. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so I just wanted to talk quickly about, Bronx residents, because I know for the Bronx, unfortunately, it's a challenge, when it comes to voting. Can you just talk about why we may be seeing that challenge and, why many people aren't taking advantage of the opportunity to make a change?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about it earlier. And when we've gone out and we've asked people, we've done the research and asked New Yorkers, what is it? What are the challenges? What would make it easier for you to vote? And frankly, a lot of people aren't voting or feel it's more difficult for them to vote just because they simply don't have the information they need to vote with confidence, right? Whether it's understanding, what's at stake and how their vote can make a difference in their everyday life, or really just having the basic information about who's on the ballot and what they stand for and then what their plans are. It's really difficult to kind of get to the polling place and you see all these names listed on the ballot and you don't have much information at your fingertips as to what that vote means to you. That's why we put so much effort into working with reaching out to those candidates for office, encouraging them to provide information about their background, about their plans, about what they want to do in office. That information for state candidates is all available on our online voter guide at nycvotes.org. And so if from governor all the way down to those state legislative offices, we've got statements from the candidates and help them understand what's at stake and what's on the ballot. What we see a lot is kind of a big drop off, for some of those ballot questions. Again, those are questions that really can make a difference in the way that the government works. In addition to the state question I mentioned earlier, we've got 3 questions on the ballot that will help. They're put forward by the Racial Justice Commission, and voters will have the opportunity to vote up or down on. Adding a statement of values to the city charter that will help aimed at promoting justice and equity for all New Yorkers. This is a question that would create a new city office that is aimed at racial equity and require the city to develop a racial equity plan that's updated every couple of years. There's another question that would require the city to measure the true cost of living in New York City. and use that information about the costs of housing, childcare, food, clothing, transportation, and healthcare to make decisions about city policies, right? But if you're seeing those questions for the first time when you get to the polling place, or when you get your ballot in the mail,
it could be a little overwhelming. I could imagine.
Be a little overwhelming, a little daunting.
Right.
That's why I think we worked so hard to put that information together, put it in plain language so folks understand it. Again, if you hopefully you got this in the mail, our voter guide, it has the print voter guide has all the information that folks will need to vote with confidence on those ballot proposals.
I want to bring
guide
up
is translated into Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Bengali, and going forward, starting next year, it'll be translated into additional 11 languages, right? So, again, I focus on the ballot questions because, what we see is kind of a huge drop off. Last year when folks came out and voted for mayor, more than 1.1 million voters came out and voted in November, but 1 out of 4 of them didn't flip that ballot over and vote on those ballot questions. So those people just give up their opportunity to weigh in and then help shape the future of city government. We're really
speaking
focused
of the future, I do want to interject and talk about young people, because I know that's another demographic that, sometimes it's a little bit harder to get them, excited or more involved. Can you talk about, efforts to get younger people involved in voting?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. Look, young people are getting more and more involved generally in politics as they kind of see what's happening at the national level. But it's still true that young voters are have the lowest turnout rates of any age group. Voters between 18 and 29 years old. Last year in the election for mayor, turnout was less than 18%. For that 18 to 29-year-old age block, that's up from 4 years earlier. It was less than 11. But even with that slight increase, young voters still have the lowest turnout rate among all age groups, and the turnout rate here in New York City for young people is lower than the overall than the national average. So why is that the case? A lot of young voters are just getting started in their voting career. Folks when they register and vote, sometimes it takes a little while to kind of understand how to engage. We're not doing as much civic education in the public schools as we used to. We need to invest more to ensure that civic education is a part of the curriculum all over the city. But I think what happens when candidates run for office, a lot of time they're focusing on the people they know are going to come out and vote. Right. So they're not investing their resources in targeting and really focusing on that younger generation. So that's a big reason why we work really hard to make sure that information is out there and available.
Can you quickly
written in plain English, so that young people can understand it. We spend, we've got, again, on, we're out on Instagram and TikTok and a lot of those platforms where young people are getting their information, making sure that it's there, it's available to them, so that they can engage and prepare to vote with confidence today.
All right, thank you so much. So we have the social media on the screen so everybody can learn a lot more about it. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Make sure today's the last day. Make sure you get out there. If you haven't done it yet, get out and vote.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. welcome back. Chemotherapy is a life-saving treatment for many Americans dealing with the effects of cancer. However, that treatment is linked to hair loss known as chemotherapy-induced alopecia. Researchers at the Montefiore Einstein Cancer Center are testing a new specialized hair technique involving scalp cooling. Here to tell us more about this study is Dr. Beth N. McClellan, the Director of Supportive Oncodermatology at Montefiore Einstein Cancer Center. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, can you tell us about the Montefiore Einstein Cancer Center?
Sure. Our cancer center is located in the Bronx, and we bring a combination of science from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine with a team-based approach to cancer care from the Montefiore Health System. We've been a designated cancer center by the NCI since 1972, and our goal is to redefine excellence in cancer research, clinical care and engagement, and partnering with our community to reduce the burden of cancer, especially in people from historically marginalized communities.
For many cancer patients, chemotherapy can be a lifesaver. But for those who don't know, can you just talk about, what chemotherapy is and, what is the process when you undergo chemo?
Sure. So chemotherapy refers to medications that are given to people with cancer with the goal of really destroying the cancer cells in the body. And many of these drugs that have been around for many years work by targeting cells in the body that are very rapidly dividing, the way cancer does. However, there are other healthy, normal cells in our body that are also rapidly dividing, including the cells that make up our hair follicles. And so we call the hair kind of an innocent bystander, that the chemotherapy is targeting the tumor, but it also is taken up by the hair. And that's why we see a lot of hair loss with many of these chemotherapy medications.
Now, I'm so glad that you brought that up because a common misconception is that, just having cancer causes hair loss. But you're explaining that that's actually not the case?
That's right. So most of the time when we see people with cancer who are going through treatment, the very severe, almost complete hair loss that we see is really related to the chemotherapy drugs. Although it's so common, we've come to really associate that look of someone with no hair as kind of defining someone who has cancer.
Thank you so much for clarifying that and explaining. Now, MECC is leading a new clinical trial aimed at fighting chemotherapy-induced alopecia, known as CIA, with a new specialized hair technique during scalp cooling. Can you tell me more about this?
Sure. So scalp cooling is exactly what the name describes. We basically are keeping the scalp and hair follicles at a colder temperature while the chemotherapy medication is being infused. So by lowering the temperature of the scalp, the blood vessels that are there close up and constrict, and so less of the chemotherapy reaches the hair follicles, although it's still circulating through the body and able to reach the area of cancer where it's really targeted.
Now, I understand there is something called cold caps and scalp cooling systems. Can you just explain the difference between the two?
Sure. So scalp cooling refers to the whole process of keeping the scalp cold or cool during the chemotherapy infusion, but there's a few different ways to achieve this. So one way is using a cap that's kept in a freezer and placed on the scalp during the chemotherapy infusion. Another way, which is what we're using, is a device made by Paxman that's actually connected to a machine, and there's a coolant that's circulated through the cap so that cold temperature is maintained throughout the chemotherapy infusion without having to replace the cap. But all of those methods can be effective.
Now, can you talk a little bit more about alopecia? I know some people just associate it with hair loss, but I guess you can get it from different ways. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So alopecia is really just the medical term for hair loss. And like you mentioned, there are many different causes of hair loss that we see in dermatology, and we treat all of them. So alopecia areata is a type of hair loss that is caused by autoimmune disease. So the patient's own immune system is attacking their hair follicles. We see very commonly hair loss related to age and hormonal changes in men and women. We see hair loss related to styling practices, genetic problems. But this study is really focused on the hair loss that we see in cancer, people with cancer who are undergoing chemotherapy.
Now, I know we had a graph up about, different ethnic groups. Can you talk about, the ethnic groups that are mostly affected by this?
So we can see hair loss and all of these types of hair loss in people of any race or ethnicity. But we know that in certain races and ethnicities and backgrounds, people identify their hair as an important part of their traditions, of their culture, of their self identity, and often a link to their community. So, although we can see hair loss in any way, in anybody, we may see some people who may be more impacted by the hair loss in different ways.
Now, I want to talk about the cold caps and the scalp cooling systems. I know there's a focus on people who are dealing with chemo, but could this also help anybody who's just dealing with hair loss in general?
So that's a great question. Unfortunately, the way the cold capping works, it's really intended to prevent the chemotherapy from reaching the scalp. So we wouldn't expect this type of treatment to work in people who have hair loss from other problems. But I will say our knowledge and treatments for other types of hair loss have also been really advancing. And so if someone's experiencing hair loss from any cause, I really encourage them to seek out evaluation by a dermatologist.
Now, I want to look closely at this study. Can you just tell us a little bit about, who are the people you're going to be looking at? Just give us some more details about the study, because we saw a few pictures already about what's happening. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So traditionally, the way scalp cooling has been used is people would wet their hair with water because the water helps the cold temperature to penetrate through their hair to the scalp where it needs to be. And then they would apply a thin layer of conditioner to help prevent the cap from sticking to their scalp. And the problem we've seen in a lot of the studies that have previously been done is that in people with naturally curly, kinky, tightly coiled or textured hair, when the hair is wet, it actually increases in volume and creates a barrier. So the cold temperature just can't reach the scalp where it needs to be. So we're adjusting that hairstyling technique before applying the cap. Instead of just plain water, we're having the women in our study really work a combination of conditioner and water through their hair. So it's not just the water alone, but really an emulsion of conditioner that's coating the hair. And then we're working with the women in our study to come up with a hairstyle that will work best for their hair type and what they know about styling their hair, with the goal of minimizing the volume of hair so that it's as flat as possible against the scalp to allow that temperature to get through. Those hairstyling techniques could include loose braids, twists, cornrows, whatever really works with that person's hair. We're really grateful and fortunate to have a hairstylist on site who's helping people style their hair so that they just have one less thing to worry about as they're going through their chemotherapy treatment.
I love that you brought that up. And even just looking at the way, different hair types react to water. I think that's so important. And I know recently we've been talking a lot about racial bias in, hospitals and just understanding that every patient is different. Can you explain, why it was so important to actually look at, something that may seem so small and how that could have a huge impact on the study?
Right. So I think this really highlights the importance of including diverse people, not only in the participation of the study, but also in the planning of the study, because I think most people with these hair types that are textured and curly and kinky would know from the get-go that this styling probably wouldn't work for them. So unfortunately, it's taken us to this point to get there, but we really hope that through the results of our study, we'll be able to offer scalp cooling and make it effective for a much more diverse group of people suffering with cancer.
And I know there is also a focus on Black and Latina women. Would you say that's part of the reason why, or can you talk about, why there is that focus?
So at Montefiore Einstein, we definitely have a focus on serving our Bronx community. We actually include about 80% of patients in our clinical studies are from underrepresented minority groups versus about 8% in the rest of the country. So we're always looking for opportunities like this study where we're not only learning more about science and how to help people, but actually giving them the opportunity to participate in trials and to really improve their treatment and their experience with their treatment during cancer.
And I think that this is just a really amazing study because I know that you talked about, having cultural styles, helps boost someone's confidence. Have you noticed or heard of anyone deciding not to do chemo due to the fear of losing their hair?
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up. So in studies, we find that about 8% of women say that they would actually turn down chemotherapy due to fear of hair loss. Hair loss related to chemotherapy is usually rated as the number one most traumatic side effect that people experience during cancer. And we definitely do see people in our practice who decide to go with an alternative chemotherapy regimen that might be less effective for treating their cancer, but really just because they don't want to lose their hair.
Now, can you just let everybody know how they could learn more about this treatment?
Sure. So we are offering this trial to all of our patients at Montefiore Einstein. Scalp cooling is also available at other cancer centers. So I encourage anyone with cancer who is discussing chemotherapy to talk to their oncologist about the option of scalp cooling. Unfortunately, there's limited insurance coverage at this point, but there's some great organizations who can help with the cost and the logistics. And I think my hope is that all cancer patients have the option for scalp cooling if they choose to go that route.
All right, Doctor, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. I think this is an amazing, effort from your team. So I really appreciate you talking to us about that.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to get this study underway. So I appreciate your interest in it.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.